The storm that night was unlike anything the desert had seen in years. Rain lashed against the cracked earth, turning dust into rivers of mud, and wind howled through the valley like a wounded beast. Inside his old wooden house, the rancher, Luke Hartman, sat alone by the fire, the light flickering across his weathered face. He hadn't had company in years, by choice. After losing his wife and son in a wagon accident, Luke had sealed his heart off from the world, choosing silence over sorrow, solitude over pain. But fate had its own plans that night. A knock echoed through the storm. Slow, hesitant, but desperate. Luke's brow furrowed. Nobody came out this far. Not in weather like this. He reached for his rifle and opened the door. There, soaked to the bone, stood a young woman clutching a bundled baby against her chest. Her lips were trembling, her eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. "Please," she whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. "Please, I just need somewhere warm for the night." Luke looked at her, silent, his jaw tight. The firelight from inside framed his tall figure like a shadow. The baby whimpered softly. "Get in," he finally said. And with those two words, everything began to change. If that moment already hooked you, don't forget to like and subscribe, 'cause this story will take you where your heart doesn't expect to go. She stepped inside, dripping water onto the old wooden floor. Luke shut the door against the storm and threw her a blanket. She huddled by the fire, holding the baby close, whispering soft words to calm it. For the first time in years, Luke heard another voice in his house, not an echo of memory, but real, fragile, alive. He poured her a cup of hot coffee, his rough hands steady despite the tension in his chest. "Name?" he asked simply. "Grace," she said softly. "And this is Emma." He nodded, saying nothing more. But as he looked at the infant in her arms, something in him stirred, a memory of his own child, his wife's laugh, the smell of morning bread that used to fill this same room. He pushed it away. "Storm will pass by morning," he said. "You can stay till then." Grace nodded, tears glinting in her tired eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Morning came with golden light breaking through gray clouds. The world outside was washed clean, but the woman inside carried a storm of her own. Luke found her standing by the window, staring out at the endless plains. "You running from something?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. "From someone," she said. "My husband, he wasn't kind. When I told him I was pregnant, he said the child would ruin his life. When she was born, her voice cracked. I left the night he tried to take her from me. We've been walking for 3 days." Luke clenched his fists, jaw tightening. He'd seen that kind of cruelty before. He knew the look in her eyes, the mix of fear, pride, and shame. He wanted to say something, but words had never been his strength. Instead, he turned to the stove. "You'll need food and rest. You can stay till you figure things out." She looked up, surprised. "I don't want to trouble you." He shook his head. "You already have." Then, after a pause, "But you're welcome anyway." Days turned into weeks. Grace began helping around the ranch, cooking, tending the chickens, mending fences when she could. Little Emma laughed often now, crawling around the dusty floor, tugging on Luke's boots. The house, once filled only with silence and ghosts, began to breathe again. Sometimes, Luke caught himself smiling. He didn't mean to. It just happened, like sunlight sneaking through a crack in the shutters. Grace noticed. She started leaving small flowers in a jar on the table, or humming soft lullabies while she worked. The place began to feel alive again. But peace is fragile in a world built on pain. One evening, a man rode up the dirt path, tall, mean-eyed, and wearing a smirk that made Luke's gut twist. Grace froze when she saw him through the window. "That's him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That's my husband." Luke stepped outside before she could stop him. The man dismounted, swaggering forward. "You got something of mine, rancher." "My wife. My kid." Luke's voice was calm, but his eyes were cold steel. "You lost Em when you raised your hand to them." The man sneered. "You think you can keep Em from me?" Luke didn't move. The silence stretched until even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "If you take one more step toward that house," Luke said, "you won't be walking away." The man's hand twitched toward his gun, but he never made it. Luke's rifle cocked with a single sound that sliced through the air. The stranger froze, eyes darting from the barrel to the unflinching face behind it. After a long moment, he spat in the dirt and turned away. "Ain't over," he muttered, mounting his horse. "Yeah," Luke said quietly. "It is." When he turned back, Grace was standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you do that for us?" she whispered. Luke looked at her, really looked, and saw the reflection of every mistake, every loss, every reason he'd built his walls. "Because I once had someone I couldn't protect," he said. "Maybe it's time I changed that." She stepped forward and hugged him, the first human touch he'd felt in years. And for a moment, the silence that had haunted his ranch finally broke. Months passed. The ranch came alive again. Flowers grew along the fence line, laughter echoed in the mornings, and Luke found himself fixing things he'd long ignored, not just around the house, but inside his heart. One evening, he sat on the porch with Grace and Emma, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire and gold. The baby was asleep in Grace's arms, and she looked at Luke with a soft smile. "You saved us," she said. He shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "You saved me." She reached over and placed her hand on his. "Maybe," she whispered, "we saved each other." The camera would fade out there, on three figures bathed in sunset light, the ranch glowing warm and alive, the past finally at peace. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes, the strongest people aren't the ones who build walls, but the ones brave enough to open their door when someone knocks.